Hey, how's it going everyone? This is OddJob here. So it's been a while since I've made the last video. It's just been really busy, but today I had some free time and I do definitely want to talk about mining, some of the mechanics that I would love to see in game. And this kind of ties into what we already have. I really do enjoy mining as a profession. This is kind of my time to go out there just to mine, watch a little Netflix, Hulu, or whatever. So I'm kind of 50% watching a TV show, 50% mining. It's just a really easy, really relaxed time for me. So the things that I want to talk about today are the things that we can kind of improve mining as a profession and how we can actually make it a more of risk versus reward. These are things that I've just made up, but it kind of has some basis on what Star Citizen's already doing for mining. So one of the features that we know is coming is that ships should be able to filter and sort on the materials coming in. So you should be able to filter into specific containers, and you should be able to filter out most of the inert materials because inert materials don't have much value. And the pros and cons to this is pretty easy to figure out, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about filtering. Sorting, we can kind of figure out why we would want to do that, but filtering is we want to remove all of that inert material because inert material isn't very profitable and it's just taking up a whole lot of space. But we really don't know any cons to that. It's like, what are the cons to actually filtering it out? There should be a risk versus reward for this type of benefit. So this is kind of where I'm going to dive into one of the core mechanics, which is what I'm going to be calling mining dust, and how we can flush it out to where it's kind of game wide, it's a little bit scalable, and it allows us to do a lot of neat things within Star Citizen. So mining dust as a mechanic is basically when you take that inert material and you grind it down and then you just spray it out of your ship because you don't want it in your cargo hold. This mining dust basically is a mixture of really fine and very coarse dust that kind of lingers around. So as you continue mining, you're basically building up a denser cloud of mining dust, and this causes several problems for you when you actually do something like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down to several levels of mining dust and how it affects you. So the first level is it just blocks visibility, which is very easy to understand. You're just spraying all of this dust out there, and if you let it continue to grow, it's just going to grow in volume, and eventually it's just going to block your visibility. Now at level 2 it gets a little bit more interesting because what it should do at this point is it's starting to block your sensor range. Sensors are really powerful because they can scan for quite a bit of distance and tell you everything that's out there. So it's one of the things that's probably a little bit overpowered in Star Citizen, but that's okay. That's why this mechanic right here exists, is that as you get more mining dust and as it gets denser, it starts reducing your range. And also a byproduct of this is because it's actually creating a void in scanning, long range sensors will be able to detect this mining dust as well, because you're essentially creating a void around yourself. So as long range sensors come in, they're going to be able to detect this void because nothing's coming back, and because mining dust isn't really a natural occurring thing. In other words, it's man-made, so it's very easy to understand what's going on there. People can actually detect that you're over there and you're mining. So I'm sure you can imagine that can add to different types of gameplay. So that's level 2. In this case, you're actually starting to make yourself noticeable to other people within the Star Citizen universe. At level 3, we start blocking communication. So this is where it starts really affecting your communications, specifically like communications to NPCs, because obviously as players, we have communications through the internet. So blocking communication doesn't really mean anything. This is more for people who want to be able to trade, negotiate, or ask for help for NPCs if they get into trouble. As we get into level 3, some of the higher levels, you're really going to be isolated. You're not going to be able to communicate with the larger NPC world, which makes up 90% of Star Citizen, because we know there's going to be a lot of NPCs out there. At level 4, this is where it starts really just becoming flat out dangerous. This is where the dust is so thick that it can actually start affecting ships. So it's going to start with the small ships, then it's going to move to medium, large, and eventually it can even affect cap ships. And basically what I'm thinking here is that there are probably subcomponents within your components that act as filters, like coolers have filters or engines have filters, and you're basically going to be damaging those filter subcomponents, which overall, given enough time, is going to be able to cripple your ship. So as you get into the higher levels of mining dust, it definitely becomes very dangerous to even just be in the vicinity of this stuff. And then if we ever reach level 5, it just basically gets to the point where you just can't enter it anymore because it's just too thick. it just becomes a hazard. It's like a nuclear wasteland. If you fly in there with a small ship, you're not going to be flying out. But we could have some very interesting places where it's a level 5 in which nobody really knows what's in there, so that there could possibly be very interesting lore surrounding that. It's kind of like a mystery area because there's just so much mining dust. You really have to be super careful if you're going to be entering there to try to explore. Could be a lot of interesting things within that area of that kind of nuclear wasteland. Now, by having mining dust, having this really interesting mechanic, it also gives you something more to think about. In other words, if you're going into a very dangerous area where there's a lot of pirates, even if you bring a heavy escort, there is some real benefits to not actually sending out that mining dust, but to actually hold it within your cargo bay and just taking it with you, because you're just going to be less noticeable. You attract a whole lot less attention, and therefore you're going to be a whole lot more safer. Now, as a sidebar to this, I do want to talk a little bit about mining composition if you're going to be sending out a mining fleet. The whole purpose of this is to make it so that every ship has a role within a mining fleet. It's just not going to be a whole bunch of giant Orions sucking through an asteroid belt and then leaving. What I would propose here is that the Pioneer, while it's a starter ship, but you can actually just mod it out to be an end-game treasure finding ship. In other words, it's going to be able to find you those really rare, fragile minerals. Most likely, in my opinion, they should be like min-max ores in which you can use the overclock components. So these are ores that players really care about, and it's really not towards construction of ships, but it's really geared towards player endgame content. Therefore, it's going to be ultra valuable, and everybody's going to be looking for them. The Argo moles are going to be more of your rare minerals. In other words, minerals that are rare enough to where you would send out a crew out there to mine those, because what I would propose here is that the Orion is really good at bulk minerals. In other words, it's really there to, get aluminum and iron, all of these vast materials that are needed to build big ships, big cities, big construction. But because the Orion's mining laser is so large and produces so much heat, it basically vaporizes any fragile materials and any of the rare ore that would be in an asteroid. So you kind of have to send out your pioneers, your moles, ahead of the Orion before the Orion gets there, because it's just going to destroy those type of minerals. Now, we don't know if there's going to be a large craft inside of the mining fleet. I assume there is, because this would probably be the command and control communication ship. So this is the ship that's going to be directing all traffic, because if you're going to be creating all of this mining dust, you want to create the dust to where you can actually see it, and making sure that your ships know where they're going and where they should be. And also the command and control ship should be aware of other mining going on in this area, because obviously as a mining fleet, you're not going to be the only one floating out there doing this. So the command and control ship should have really good long range sensors, being able to understand what mining is going around and where they're headed and how that's going to affect you. Because obviously, if there's going to be a new asteroid belt full of a lot of rare materials, there's going to be a lot of orgs, guilds, syndicates, whatever you want to call them, out there mining it. So you have to be aware of each other. You have to be able to coordinate at least enough to where you're not running into each other's mining dust. So that kind of gives a new level of strategy. There's also the fact that the command and control ship most likely will be the one that's coordinating transport of the ore out, where it's going, what kind of contracts it's going to fulfilling, because obviously with the dynamic economy, you can't just send all ore to one system and just continue doing that. Eventually that system will not need any more ore, and you're going to have to be able to distribute that. And of course, you're going to be competing with the other mining fleets for that same demand. Alright, before moving on, I do want to talk a little bit about min-max ores or minerals. These are basically ores that players care about, because they allow you to create a lot of cool either components or access to gameplay that they didn't already have. So like better overclock components or access to ships that they normally can't create. These are the type of ores that are super valuable in super low quantity, and they're really worth hunting. And one of the things that it's going to be interesting about it is that they should kind of have a low threshold for heat and also for impact damage. So in other words, you have to be very careful. It's basically going to be geared towards specific ships with specific lasers meant to cut very small areas out, and for that player to actually have to go out and finish the last piece of it with a hand mining tool, because these things are really valuable. I would also make these minerals and ores very pretty. In other words, you can actually make them into jewelry for either male or female characters. That way you could actually choose to make that into like an earring in which you can wear around. So any player that walks by another player with that particular earring on knows that, oh wow, that mineral right there could overclock a specific component by 20%. They know there is a tangible value to that particular item if they were to take it to an overclocking science ship. Those specific ores are really important to players because they lead to in-game content for the players, but it could also be used as jewelry for reputation. Maybe NPCs that see you wearing that jewelry will have a higher regard for you. So, there's this nice balance between whether or not you want to make it into something functional or you want to make it into something that's flashy, might give you reputation, or you just want to show off. But there's tangible values on both sides, and there's reasons why other players want that stuff and why they might want to steal it from you. Alright, so I spent a little bit of time talking about sidebar. I want to get back to the core subject because I can talk about that for a very long time, and that's not what this video is about. The reason why we're doing mining dust as a core mechanic here is because sensors inside Star Citizen are really powerful, and we need some ways to be able to mitigate that in mining dust, and it could be anything else, right? You can replace the word mining dust with a whole bunch of other things and kind of get to the same type of mechanic. But what it does is it allows for piracy, smuggling, people that just want to hide from long-range sensors, whatever it may be. It basically creates areas where people can hide, where we can get to the more seedier parts of what Star Citizen wants to be able to have. But having this type of mechanic basically allows for other types of career gameplay. And what I would suggest here is that salvage and combat have similar mechanics, so it should have science, like when you overclock a component, it should create distortions or something like that. They're basically human-made anomalies that causes other problems for humans, which honestly happens all the time. So basically, if you behave badly, bad things could happen because of that. So if you go into a certain area and you just mine to your heart's content, don't be surprised when pirates come and attack you and your sensors didn't pick anything up. So, things of that nature. A lot of risk, a lot of reward, and a lot of scaling in a lot of different levels. Okay, last thing to talk about, and I'll wrap this up because it is getting a little long, and let's talk a little bit on how this core mechanic can become a gate or a limiter to gameplay, and these are really important to video games like MMOs. How it can be a gate to players is that, let's say, for example, a core system sets down a law saying you cannot have X parts per million of mining dust in an area. So this basically says if you go into an asteroid belt and you start creating mining dust, the police are going to show up and saying you can't do that. They'll fine you, they'll arrest you, and if you don't do anything, they'll blow you up. So basically what it allows the game is to be able to protect the core systems with just common sense laws saying that you just don't want to generate all this mining dust because it's very dangerous. It also, as a byproduct, will allow you to protect newbie areas and also to train newbies, because as they go out there and because it's very safe, they can start mining, but at a certain point the police will show up and tell them, hey, there's a law about this. So they kind of get an understanding of reputation, what law is, and all of that other stuff. And it all falls into the realm of plausibility because of this mechanics. So basically, this is a very natural way of being able to force miners and other players out further from the core systems, because you can just lay down these laws, protect these systems, and make it more civilized or friendly to the newbie areas. Now, how this can work as a limiter is essentially how much mining dust gets created per one SEU. I'm just making up something here, but the amount of creation of mining dust per SEU, and also the dispersion rate of these particular mining dust, and for each type of asteroid it could be a different number. So this is important because as players we kind of are min-maxers. That's what we naturally do. So we really don't want to see a system that gets built, it takes a year to build out this system. The players come in, they strip mine the whole entire place, and then they leave. And that system that you spent a year building is basically barren. Nobody comes back to it anymore. So what you really want to do here is you want to be able to regulate consumption of raw materials so that players can move to another system, but they're willing to come back because there's still really good amounts of resources. And as time goes by, it's probably going to be more protected and it's going to be easier to get to. So basically, if you want to protect an area, you can kind of control it through how quickly that mining dust gets created. You can jump into a system that you know nothing about, but as soon as you exit out and you see this cloud of mining dust all over the place and it kind of just covers the whole entire system, you automatically know, oh, this must be a really valuable mining system for this much mining dust to be around. You kind of get a sense for that entire system just by the visuals of it. You might actually have to land on something like a privateer, go into the shop, buy some subcomponent filters because you just want to make sure you can make it through the system just in case the mining dust gets a little bit too hardcore. So there's some other interesting gameplay that can bleed into it. Anyhow, I'm just going to go ahead and cut the video here. Hopefully it was interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching.